Hello and welcome back to the Dogma Podcast, where we dive into everything related to hunting dogs and the hunting dog lifestyle. I am your host, Dr. Seth Bynum, and in this episode, I chatted with colleague and self-diagnosed working dog fanatic, Dr. Cynthia Otto. Dr. Otto is board certified in sports medicine and rehabilitation, as well as emergency and critical care, making her uniquely qualified to weigh in on the stress that heat and early season environmental factors pose to hunting dogs. Great dog word, nice retrieve, beautiful scenery, and all those things come together, man. What a dog. Can't get enough of it. As executive director and founder of the Penn Working Dog Center, Dr. Otto oversees the fitness and medical care of the program's detection dogs, provides rehabilitation and conditioning for police and other working dogs, and, as it pertains to this interview anyway, conducts vital research in the field of working canines. With over 140 peer-reviewed articles, reviews, and book chapters under her belt, she is an internationally recognized expert in both emergency medicine and working dog science. Specifically, Dr. Otto's cooling study, my air quotes there, breaks through the clutter of hot weather social media advice you've already scrolled past and gives us real-world data for keeping hunting dogs safe. Her team of researchers compared various methods of reducing core body temperature and were surprised at which technique worked head and shoulders, you'll get the pun later, above the rest. Enjoy our conversation. Dr. Otto, it's a real pleasure to have you on the Dogma Podcast. Welcome.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, for sure. So if you don't mind, give us a little bit of your background and working dogs, and then tell us a little bit about the Penn Vet Working Dog Center.
I absolutely adore working dogs. I started to get involved first with search and rescue dogs, mostly urban search and rescue dogs, but it's expanded to pretty much any kind of working dog and sporting dog. It has led me to a career shift from emergency medicine to canine sports medicine, and really seeing what these dogs can do and helping them perform in the best and safest way is what I love about veterinary medicine. So it's very exciting.
You were behind the development of the Working Dog Center. Is that what I read from your bio?
That is correct. So the Penn Vet Working Dog Center really did come out of my work with working dogs. I started working with the search and rescue dogs back in about 1994, which is a really long time ago. But that set me up to be able to deploy with the Pennsylvania Task Force to Hurricane Floyd and then to 9/11. And it really was 9/11 that shifted the gears quite a bit, because what we saw was a lot of information was missing, and how to care for these dogs, what risks they were even experiencing, occupational hazards, how could we better prepare veterinarians to care for these dogs, but handlers to get their dogs ready to work in the most effective and safest way. And so it took us 10 years, but in 2012, we opened the Penn Vet Working Dog Center. We opened it on September 11th of 2012, sort of as a legacy to the work of 9/11, and particularly to the dogs that were so instrumental in helping us at 9/11. And our program has named our dogs after dogs that worked at 9/11 or victims of 9/11. So that's really been an important part of us to this date. And now that we have sort of included all of the dogs that worked at 9/11 in our program, all the dogs that we had in our study, where we followed the health and the behavior of those dogs for the rest of their lives. This has allowed us to create this center, and you might actually hear a dog in the background training at the moment, but it is a research training and education program where we raise and train detection dogs. It's purely detection work that we do. So law enforcement, search and rescue, single purpose detection, conservation, and many of our dogs are coming out of the amazing hunting dog breeding lines. So we're really grateful for all of those people who put in the effort to select dogs that are so intense, incredible, and use their noses so well.
I think a lot of listeners are going to resonate, at least with the energy and the purpose-driven breeding that's behind these canine athletes. I'm old enough to recall in the aftermath of 9/11 how working dogs became part of I mean, they always have been, but really, across the nation, part of the collective consciousness of people, seeing these stories of how those heroes, really, canine heroes, really did their job and made a huge difference in that event, that disaster. It left a mark on me for sure.
It was definitely a turning point in our culture of recognizing the importance and the value of working dogs, and it has changed a lot of people's lives and gotten people to be more involved with working dogs, which is exciting. The area has grown a lot, and the science has also grown, which is wonderful. We now have many more programs that are interested in the science of working dogs, from the physiology to the cognition to the olfaction to all of the pieces that make these dogs do such an amazing job.
Definitely. You mentioned that before you were a sports medicine and rehab specialist, you were an emergency and critical care specialist. So you are uniquely qualified to talk about hyperthermia and overheating, I guess, for the late term, and specifically exercise-induced hyperthermia. Can you define that for us, just so we're all on the same page?
Absolutely, and it's kind of a big phrase, and you're like, what are you really talking about? So the thing that we start with is hyperthermia, which hyper means increase, thermia means temperature. And so we're really just thinking about an increase in body temperature and above the normal background. For a dog, we know that the normal resting temperature is about 100.5 to 102.5 Fahrenheit. And so anything above that would be hyperthermia. And what we think about is, well, how is that exercise associated? We know when we exercise, we use our muscles generate a lot of heat while they're doing their activity. And that heat has to go somewhere. In people, we sweat and we eliminate much of that heat. It's more efficient, it seems, than our dogs, who can only eliminate that heat or predominantly eliminate that heat through panting. So we have that limitation, and dogs seem to get pretty hot when they exercise. And we've actually measured that in our dogs. And we find that very quickly dogs will hit 105. And interestingly, in our veterinary textbooks and in the emergency room, if a dog came in at 105, I would lose my mind and go, oh my gosh, this dog is in huge danger and it's heat stroke and we've got to do everything. And what we've realized working in the field and working with the dogs actually at the point that they are exercising, they hit 105, and that's just kind of routine. And so we need to take a lot of other pieces of information when we think about, are they in danger? Are they in that high risk zone? Because if they progress on from hyperthermia, they can progress to what we would call heat stress. So yeah, we're hot, we're feeling a little crummy, but we're not in danger to heat injury, where we actually can start to have damage to some of our organs or our tissues, to heat stroke, where we have serious damage and our brain's not working. And those, when they hit heat stroke, they usually collapsed and they have about a 50% chance of dying. And so, what are these characteristics that tell us that they're in these phases? And temperature is helpful, but it's not the whole story. And as a matter of fact, we find that actually looking at the physical characteristics of the dog is more informative than taking their temperature. And so we teach our handlers and our trainers to rely very heavily on what does the dog look like. And so the classic signs that a dog is starting to overheat, because they pant to get rid of their heat, they would be panting excessively. But also you'll see that their tongue starts to get a lot longer. It starts to, broaden and flatten. Their saliva gets thick and ropey because it's already evaporated all the liquid stuff. Their eyes, the non-scientific term is squinty. They get squinty eyes, and you can just look at them, and they almost look like they have a headache because their ears tend to pull back, their eyes are squinty, they've got this very wide open mouth where you can see their teeth all the way to the back because they're panting hard. So those are kind of the features that we often see. And then what some people will recognize behaviorally is they might be seeking the shade, but they might also be less obedient. They might not come back on a retrieve as directly as they would if they're full and fresh. So those signs are telling us this dog is starting to walk that danger line between hyperthermia and maybe heat stress to even heat injury. And so when we see those signs, that's when we stop. We stop activity, and just stopping activity isn't enough if we've crossed into that heat stress to heat injury. We actually need to actively cool these. We did a study and looked at what happens if you just stop their activity, put them in the shade, and have them rest. Well, it takes a really long time for that temperature to come back down. So we want to talk about active cooling.
That's interesting. How big of a risk is this, or how frequently do you see this in working dogs and by extension hunting dog?
So what we know, and the data is not really clear, but what we know from the literature in military working dogs, where they have a lot of good data, it is the number one preventable cause of death in our dogs less than 5. So it's real, it's out there, and we already talked about the fact that our hunting dogs and our working dogs have this incredible motivation or drive to work, and they love what they're doing. So when they're working, they actually seem to shut out all of those normal physiologic responses that tell them to stop because they're getting too hot. And we say they have no self-preservation. They really just kind of work through all of that stuff. And so we as humans observing all of this need to be responsible for going, whoa, that dog's pushing the limits. It still thinks it can go until it collapses. We don't want to get it to that point.
Hang with us. We'll be right back.
Pro Plan is always advancing with game-changing formulas that promote mental sharpness and support urinary health, that maintain healthy joints and help extend lives. Made by experts and trusted by vets. Pro Plan, advanced nutrition, supplements, and veterinary diets. Purina Pro Plan, always advancing.
If you're not actively protecting your hearing in the field, you're running out of excuses. With so many advances in hearing pro technology, it's never been easier to protect one of your essential senses and even enhance your hearing in the field. For the past couple of seasons, I've been using the Alclair EXP Pro. They're custom-molded digital hearing protection that I put through the paces in multiple types of terrain and extremes of weather. Alclair cut their teeth in the music industry, which is pretty cool, making custom in-ear monitors for musicians, ones like I'm wearing right now to record this podcast. I love that these are loaded with tech, but don't rely on a charging case. I'm really bad about remembering to charge all my devices before an outing. When the batteries go dead in my Alclairs, which is pretty rare given the remarkable battery life in these devices, I just pop in a new set, and in under a minute, I'm back to the hunt. My other favorite thing about my EXPs is that I can manually dial up the volume to compensate for the deficits in my right ear. Having my hearing balanced for the first time since childhood has made a huge difference in my ability to pinpoint the location of sounds from flushing grouse or gobbling turkeys. You can turn the volume down if it gets loud in thick brush, or you can do what I did multiple times this spring, perch yourself on a ridge and dial these babies up to 11 to hear distant gobbles. It's like having a superpower. But my favorite part of owning Alclairs is knowing that I'm supporting a really cool group of sportsmen. Mark and Art and the team at Alclair are passionate about the outdoors and music, two of my favorite things, and I love the mom and pop vibe of their company. Check out Alclair on social media at Alclair Outdoors, or better yet, go to their website, alclair.com, that's ALCLAIR.com, and start building your very own custom pair of digital hearing protection.
We built this dog bed for ourselves first, but also for everybody. We knew where other dog beds lacked, and we knew we could build something that we, at the end of the day, put our logo on and our stamp of approval. Every little feature is important. It's wild how non-slip this base is. A Chevy, who's a maniac, will jump on it and the bed will not move. It looks like it's taped to the ground. We made this dog bed that you don't have to take it apart to clean it as much, but when you do, it's an easier process. You're not going to break some zipper in the middle of it or get frustrated trying to put it back together. The material being water resistant, easy to clean, easy to spot clean, and just the comfort. I mean, I don't know how to explain it, but it seems that most dogs prefer our bed over the others. One of the frustrating parts about other dog beds is the foam mattress material. Our 3D loop material, it's totally waterproof, it's antimicrobial, it will not mold. We wanted to put a handle on there so you can carry it from room to room. You can carry it to your vehicle, wherever you're taking your dog, but hopefully is the perfect piece to keep your dog next to you, whether that's at the camp, at the lake house, at your house. We want this thing used everywhere you go. The Homestead dog bed is everything that other dog beds aren't.
I've seen this, exactly what you're describing, and I would say that there are definitely a subset of hunting dogs, and I couldn't ascribe a percentage to it, but are driven to that point to ignore all of those impulses to take a break, to quit, to take a drink, even in some of them. So
Absolutely.
I think a lot of listeners can relate to what you're describing. The reason why you're here is your team has performed a really interesting study that came to me just in my cohort of friends chatting that had heard about it tangentially. So I had to dig into the literature and saw that your team had looked at ways to cool dogs. Active cooling is, to use the term you described. Can you describe to us which cooling methods you employed in this study and why you chose the ones you did?
Sure. Actually, we did 2 studies, and we're following that up with another study this summer. So we're really excited to keep digging into this information. Because of the threat of exercise-induced hyperthermia and the risk of heat stroke, we wanted to come up with ways and confirm ways that did or didn't work. So our first study, we looked at having a kiddie pool where the dog would go in and lay down in the pool to cool off. We also, because there's a lot of chatter back and forth about using alcohol, so rubbing alcohol and putting it on the dog's feet, because even though dogs predominantly use panting to eliminate heat, we do know they sweat, but they only sweat on their feet. And so in our veterinary literature, there are often recommendations, put alcohol on their feet to help cool them. And to me, that's always had a couple of concerns. One is that if we're only cooling their feet and we have this big dog, we're only cooling a very small part of that dog. So that has question about efficacy. The other is if we're using alcohol, it's flammable. It's also irritating. And so our concerns are, is this a safe and effective way to treat the dog? Or is it the same? If it's the same as just using water, then let's use water because it's safer and then we don't have to carry something else. And so the first study we did, we looked at the dog standing on a towel that was soaked with alcohol. So it was just getting their alcohol on their feet. And we compared that to dogs going in the kiddie pool or just resting in the shade. What we found was that the sort of the gold standard that's been published is total body immersion. So having a dog, in a dunk tank, in a river, in some place to cool their, get their whole body wet and then get them out so that the air can, move and evaporate all that water off of them to help cool them. So that's really been the standard. And we wanted to use that as our standard, compare that to the alcohol, compare that to the passive cooling. The pool and the what we call partial body immersion was more effective than the alcohol. There was some effect of the alcohol, but it wasn't as big as the pool. But what we found with the pool, and we had the pool at 72 degrees, which is room temperature, but when it's 90 degrees outside, you actually have to add ice to keep it that cold. Some of the dogs would stand in the pool, some of the dogs would lie down in the pool, some of the dogs were like, I don't want to go in the pool, even though they were hot. And so that was like, whoa, that's an issue. And we're very much interested in having the dog participate in their cooling, not do something to the dog to create a stressful environment that might actually make more of a struggle. So when we were done with that, there are a couple things that we thought about. It's like, well, that was okay. It wasn't great. But I had also spent some time in Africa working with some conservation dogs, and they can't go swimming in the river because there are crocodiles and hippopotami and other bad things in the water. So, okay. And a lot of people might not have access to a body of water or total body immersion. It's not a field applicable approach. So what kind of things would we have that we might be able to carry with us if we're out in the field away from major resources? And so we took 4 different techniques. One was those chemical ice packs that you can snap open and make cold. And we're like, okay, how about if we use those, put them under their collars on their neck to cool all of that blood that's flowing to their head. We were excited because we thought that's a pretty cool idea. It's easy and it's translatable. The second was taking a towel and wetting that with cool water and then wrapping it around their neck. Because we think about when we cool, we want their neck to be cool because all of that heat that's going to their brain, keep their brain cool. So that was kind of a direction we were going. The other was we think about wetting them in their armpits, the areas where they don't have as much fur. And so we did a towel that was put in cold water, 72 degrees again, and then we sort of wrapped that under their armpits. All of these interventions were just 30 seconds, so we're not talking about long term. But the final one was one that I had really enjoyed doing because we learned that from our dogs here at the Working Dog Center, when they would get something up their nose and they would be sneezing, we would have them blow bubbles in a pool of water or in a tub of water. And so we called that, bobbing for blueberries or, whatever we were calling it. We started to use that a long time ago. And then we realized, oh, wow, if they get some irritation in their eyes, we can have them go a little bit deeper and actually flush their eyes in this bucket of clean water. And that was something that just had been part of what we do. And I thought, I wonder if dunking their whole head in water is actually going to help them cool off, because I know when I'm hot, it feels really good to cool my head. So we decided we would do this, what we call the voluntary head dunk, as part of our test to see if there was an effect of that cooling method, if it did anything, because we had no evidence, no data. No one's ever really talked about that before in dogs. And so we did the study, and it turned out that the only thing that really had a major effect was this voluntary head dunk. The other techniques had a little bit of an effect compared to, not cooling. But the real effect was when they would dunk their head in this cool bucket of water. And it was only 2 or 3 dunks, so less than 30 seconds of time. Their temperature dropped down dramatically, and it dropped down almost immediately. And we know in that first 5 minutes after exercise, the temperature continues to rise, and that's really one of our danger spots.
So you went into this study expecting that these chemical ice packs around the neck were going to be the most efficient way to cool a dog. And I could see how you could, carry those in the field for an emergency situation. And then you sort of added this head dunking as maybe not an afterthought, that may be too strong of a term, but just we have these dogs ready to already kind of trained to do this. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but you trained that procedure in these dogs to sort of, these are scent detection dogs for the most part, right? They're not kind of working. So you're like cleaning their upper airway, if they have a grass seed or some other foreign object in there, not necessarily as initially as a cooling mechanism. Am I
Right. No, we were not thinking of this as cooling at all in the beginning. But it was, again, when I was in Africa, it's like, I wonder, because they have such limited water and, could we use this, one, to help with the dust, but also this might be beneficial.
Can you put it in sort of non-scientific terms, like the degree to which the head dunking method was more efficient than the others?
If you think about the temperature climbing, so the temperature at the end of exercise was about 105. And afterwards, with all our other cooling methods, it crept up to maybe 105.5 or 106. And over about 30 minutes, it gradually came back down to about 103, which was their starting temperature. Because, again, these are excitable dogs. Their temperature's already up before they even start working. And then with our head dunk, the temperature actually dropped down below 103. It was down to about, I think, 101. I'd have to look at the actual data, but it dropped down immediately, and then it slowly got back to the 103 mark. So instant drop, started to climb back up to what was their baseline. The thing that we know about that is, well, if they're still hot or if they're getting hot again, we can head dunk again. We only did this once for 30 seconds at the end of their exercise, And this is a technique that can be easily done even before they go out to work. It can be done at intervals during work to try and keep them cool. Now, we haven't tested all of that, but based on how the body works and how it eliminates heat, what we've realized is that, we know for sure that panting becomes ineffective when the temperature and the humidity get high. Because if you have high humidity, they can no longer evaporate that moisture. So it's not effective. But if you cool their head, so that's actually going to, that's going to physically cool the blood and the skin and all of the stuff that's in their head. And there'll be some evaporation of that water. And so we have lots of different mechanisms of cooling that are augmenting what's already happening with our panting.
Can you describe to the listeners kind of what the tissue situation is like in there, and what the cooling of that really provides in terms of how I assume they kind of go on panting, but now that the tissue is much cooler than it had been previously, it's more effective. Can you kind of give us like a sort of a short anatomical overview of what's involved in the dunk?
So what we can think about, if anyone has seen one of the infrared heat sensing cameras, if you put one of those on a dog after exercise, you're going to see areas that are lighting up as being really, really hot. And it's going to be their ears, their head, their nose, all of that area. There's, lots of the blood is just flowing to that area, because what the dog is trying to do is get to areas, one, where you can lose the heat just through the body contact with the air itself, as opposed to the evaporation. So it's just contact. The feet and the legs also have a lot of loss of that heat. The body itself, especially when we've got dogs with, a heavy fur coat, that is going to lose less heat. It's going to hold the heat in. And so when we cool the head, the blood that's going to the head cools, but that cool blood also goes back to the rest of the body and helps cool the rest of the body.
Yeah, this is really fascinating to me. And so everybody's going to ask this, I know. And then the question is, how did you train the dogs to do this? I have one dog that does this on her own, just for fun. Just Bob, if you throw a rock down, she's going to go investigate. And another one that you'd have to force them to do it naturally. So what was the process of training these dogs to do this?
Yeah, so that's part of the great thing, is that the dogs learn that this is a game. And so training it can be very simple. We had a Labrador, and that Labrador, within about 30 seconds, went from retrieving a treat from the bottom of a dry bucket to retrieving a treat from the bucket where we had about a 1/4 inch of water. Then we added 2 inches of water, and then we added 4 inches of water, and then we filled the bucket up the whole way, and it was retrieving that treat without a thought. We had a Border Collie who took a while to retrieve the treat from the dry bucket, and when we added a little bit of water, they're like, I'm not so sure. And then we added, so it was a lot slower, but it was gradual building up that comfort with that dog, learning that they can blow bubbles in the water. So they learn to blow out as they put their nose underwater. And once they get comfortable with that, then they're much more comfortable putting their head further in the water. So it's a process of doing that. We had a Malinois who was totally Kong crazy. And that one, I think we dropped the Kong in an empty bucket. We dropped the Kong in a bucket with about 4 inches of water, and then we dropped the bucket and dropped the Kong in a full bucket, and instantly that dog was dunking his head to get his Kong, because he didn't care where he put his head. If the Kong was there, he was going to go through fire or whatever to get that Kong. So part of it depends on the motivation of the dog, of how you're going to train it, whether it's going to be a toy, and obviously it can't be a floating toy. It has to be a toy that sinks, or food. And what we find is that string cheese is one of our best food, because we don't want it to dissolve in the water and we need it to sink. So that's kind of one of the little tricks that we use to train this. But it's remarkably easy to train it. And we have published a video with the step-by-step, and also talking about how we use it to flush the nose and flush the eyes. But it's surprising how quickly dogs will learn this technique.
Yeah, a couple of points there. One that says a lot about the stereotypical nature of the breeds that you referenced there and how they responded to the training. And then two, you sent me a QR code for that video, and I'll make sure to get it posted in the show notes. So I guess talking about breeds and tying this back to hunting dogs and the people who are listening, do you feel like this is a viable strategy for hunters to employ in their own dogs? For the field?
I definitely think it is. And part of it is going to, depend on how much water you have. And, can you create a way that you can have them dunk their head? What we're going to be doing this summer is, okay, what if we don't have even that much water? So we're going to look at soaking a towel and wrapping it around their head, because in the previous study, we wrapped it around their neck, but we didn't wrap it around their head. So we're looking to try and take this to the next level. And we're also looking to see what temperature of water is really going to be the most effective. So we're going to look at our 72 degree, which is room temperature, and then we're going to look at 56 degrees, which is the groundwater temperature. So what might come out of a hose, out of a well, out of pipes. So we're going to, how cold can we go and still be safe, and how effective and how quickly are we going to cool these dogs? So those are kind of the strategies that we're looking at, and continuing to think about the field application, because it's all well and good to dunk a dog in a dunk tank, but if you don't have a dunk tank available, then what's your next thing? And the other piece that I always want to remind people, if you do total body immersion, but then you go ahead and you put that dog back in the truck in a dog box or in a crate that doesn't have ventilation, that water can't evaporate, and it just increases the humidity and actually makes things hotter, and you end up steaming the dog. So when we do total body immersion, or if the dog's been swimming, we want to make sure we've got excellent ventilation so that water can evaporate, that we can have that heat transfer that happens.
I think that's great advice. I mean, I always encourage people, especially early in the hunting season, which I think was when most people are going to be listening to this podcast, that, obviously having a safe water source available is a great idea. But I can think of other applications where training a dog to blow bubbles could be useful as a first aid mechanism, or to clear their airways for better scenting overall and performance.
Yeah, we would love to be able to track and see if people who are doing this sort of as a routine find that their dogs are more efficient in their scenting ability. And it could be because they're staying cooler, but it could also be because it's hydrating their nasal passages. That's an area. Another place where this is actually potentially important is in decontamination. So, if they get into something and it's really hard to decontaminate their head, but if they're willing to do a head dunk, we can decontaminate the rest of the body. And then, again, with clean water and making sure we're taking care of it that way, that we can actually get their head decontaminated from any kind of exposure.
After a quick break, we'll catch up with Dr. Otto again in a follow-up interview where she shares a few more effective strategies for cooling dogs down in the field. Stay with us. The Dogma Podcast is proudly supported by Hunt.Vet, the world's largest crowdsourced database of sporting dog-friendly veterinarians. Head to the website on your desktop or mobile device. The name is the URL, Hunt.Vet, where you can search for a hunting dog vet by city, state, or zip code near home, or pro tip, research a vet in a place you plan to travel before loading up the kennels on your hunting road trip. Hunt.Vet is a crowdsourced endeavor, so its success depends on contributions from the sporting dog community. If you don't see your trusted vet in the Hunt.Vet directory, click on the Recommend a Veterinarian button and share your positive experience with fellow hunters. Vets who are verified in the system, meaning they are actively managing their own public profiles, can share images, logos, or scheduling links, as well as a detailed list of the services they provide. A common question I get is, does a vet have to hunt to be in the database? And the answer is no. Being a trusted sporting dog vet is about mindset, not credentials. The only prerequisite is that the vet gets it, air quotes there. They understand the unique needs of sporting dogs and the physical demands of dogs like yours that work for a living. Coming really soon will be our Chat with a Vet program, where sporting dog enthusiasts like you can be connected directly with an accredited vet in our directory. This advice-only platform can help you triage an issue or shed light on some of those "does this need to go to the vet?" questions. It's also a great place to seek answers from a vet that's a fellow sporting dog enthusiast in situations where you feel your regular veterinarian lacks the hunting experience to answer. I'm excited and relieved to finally have a trusted place to direct all the DM questions I receive in social media that I'm just too swamped to answer. Check out Hunt.Vet and help us grow this community. I had spent some time reviewing our previous conversation and sharing what we talked about with some of my hunting buddies, and we're all sort of chomping at the bit to get going here in September or late August here in Idaho. And one thing I felt that was missing from our first conversation was sort of a direct call to action. Full body immersion is the gold standard. And then sort of second to that is this head dunk, which you've described so far. And then I've directed people to your video to train that. Let's say hypothetically, and maybe not so hypothetically, there's some people who are ready to start hunting in the next couple of days. They've got a dog that they're not going to invest the time into training right away, or the process of teaching the head dunk is slow. What's a good second or third best in your book for cooling your dog in the field in a hunting or working situation?
So that's a great question, because we've looked at soaking a towel and putting it around their neck. We've looked at ice packs on their neck. We've looked at, all of these other techniques, and none of them are really very effective. So the total body immersion, absolutely. If you can let them jump in a river, jump in a lake while they're out there. I mean, certainly, depending on what type of hunting you're doing, there may or may not be bodies of water that you have access to.
Sure.
And what are your tools that you have when you're out there? What are you carrying with you? If you're only carrying a bottle of water or Camelback or something, how much water can you use? And what I would probably start with is that I would start with getting their head wet. Mm-hmm. So without creating an aversive environment, I would take my bottle of water, I would cover my dog's eyes, and I would try and put that, let that water drip down my dog's head. We couldn't do that approach in our study because we couldn't quantify how much water was getting on their head. Right. And so that's the why we used a towel that was soaked, but the towel just didn't give us, I'm not convinced yet with our preliminary data that the towel is going to be the answer. I don't think it's going to be the same as the head dunk. The head dunk is just such a total immersion. They drink a little bit of water at the same time, but drinking water doesn't seem like it's a huge part of the cooling. Probably adds a little bit. But we don't want dogs that are overly heated and panting, drinking, gallons of water, because then we are concerned about things like bloat.
The total body immersion has, I guess, for a lot of years been the standard people will provide in their early season outings, and even their mid to late season outings, depending on the temperature. So like having a place along your route that you hunt that has a little pond or somewhere that can get access to clean water that's still going to work really well with all the research you've done. And then a lot of people in dry climates will utilize a stock tank or a guzzler or a place where water has pooled up, and those, based on what you've discovered, still continue to be highly effective ways to doing that. But if you want to go next level and really enhance the cooling, you'll train to do the head dunk.
These dogs are trained to hunt. They're trained. They're smart. We found, especially if you're dealing with retriever breeds, it doesn't take long for most of them to learn to get their toy out of the bottom of a bucket of water.
Yeah. I enjoyed watching your videos so much of how you all trained and how you implemented that technique. And from your Instagram page, is that a great place for them to learn more about the Penn Vet Working Dog Center through social media?
Absolutely. We have a very active Instagram and Facebook page. So we welcome people to come and see what we're doing. We're doing all sorts of work with detection and research, and our dogs are really fun to watch.
Dr. Otto, this has been a great conversation. I hope people have learned a lot from this study and from what you've shared with us today. Thanks so much for your time.
You bet. Absolutely.
Thanks again for tuning into the Dogma Podcast. If you learned something from this episode, please subscribe to the show, and share with your friends and hunting buddies. We'd like to send a big shout out of thanks to Purina Pro Plan for sponsoring the show. and for helping my hunting dogs bring their A game day in, day out. If there's a veterinary topic or any other topic related to hunting dogs you'd like covered, send us an email at editor@huntingdogma.com or send us a direct message through Instagram or Facebook at huntingdogma.